Owen's phone screamed at 2 a.m., an unknown number. He almost ignored it. But then he heard her voice, raw, shattered, gasping between sobs. "Can you come over and be with me?" A wrong call. A stranger's desperation. He should have hung up. Instead, he found himself standing in front of a penthouse door, heart pounding, wondering what kind of madness had possessed him. The woman who opened that door wasn't what he expected. Smeared mascara, trembling hands, a silk robe worth more than his monthly rent. Her eyes, empty, hollow, like someone had carved out everything inside her. This was Vivian Ashford, the CEO whose face graced every business magazine, the ice queen who made grown men cower, and right now, she was begging a single dad she'd never met to stay. What happened in that penthouse would change everything, for both of them. The hallway smelled like expensive perfume and silence. Owen stood there, his work boots looking ridiculous against the marble floor, his flannel shirt wrinkled from a long day at the warehouse. He didn't belong here. Everything about this building screamed money, the kind of money that made people like him invisible. The doorman had looked at him like he was lost, like he had wandered into the wrong universe. But Owen had shown him the text message with the address, and the doorman had stepped aside with barely concealed disbelief. Now here he was, standing in front of penthouse door 47A, his heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted to escape. He had come anyway, driven by something he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way her voice had cracked on the phone. Maybe it was the memory of his own darkest nights, when he would have given anything for someone to just show up. He raised his hand to knock, but the door swung open before his knuckles touched the wood. She stood there like a broken statue. Vivian Ashford. He recognized her face from the company newsletters, from the massive portrait hanging in the lobby of Cross Industries, where he loaded trucks 5 days a week. But the woman in those pictures was polished, untouchable, carved from ice. This woman was falling apart. Her mascara had traced black rivers down her cheeks. Her hands shook so badly she had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. The silk robe she wore probably cost more than his car, but it hung on her shoulders like a surrender flag. She looked at him with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. "You came," she whispered, and her voice broke on the second word. Owen didn't know what to say. He didn't know why he was here, standing in front of a stranger who had dialed the wrong number in her darkest moment. But something in her expression, that raw, desperate need to not be alone, reminded him of the nights after his wife died. The nights when the silence of his empty bedroom felt like drowning. The nights when his daughter's sleeping breath was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. So he nodded, stepped inside, and closed the door behind him. The penthouse was enormous and cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling below like a circuit board of lights, but the apartment itself felt lifeless. White furniture, white walls, art that looked expensive but said nothing. There were no photographs anywhere, no personal touches. Nothing that suggested a human being actually lived here. Owen had the strange feeling that this was a showroom, not a home, a place designed to impress, not to comfort. Vivienne walked ahead of him, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and collapsed onto a couch that probably cost more than his annual salary. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small, and Owen realized with a start that she was still crying. Not loud sobs anymore, just tears leaking steadily from eyes that had given up trying to stop them. He sat down on the opposite end of the couch, careful to keep distance between them. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick, but Owen didn't try to fill it. He had learned, in the years since losing his wife, that sometimes words were useless. Sometimes the only thing that helped was knowing someone else was breathing the same air, existing in the same moment of pain. So he sat there, hands folded in his lap, and waited. After what felt like hours, Vivian finally spoke. "He was in my bed," she said, and the words came out flat. "Dead." With her. In my bed. In my apartment. With someone I trusted. My assistant. The woman I promoted last year because I thought she was talented. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just broken glass. I came home early from a conference. The door was unlocked. I heard them before I saw them. Laughing. In my bedroom. In my sheets. Her voice cracked again. 7 years. 7 years I gave him. I thought he was different. I thought he saw me. Not my money. Not my title. Just me. She pressed her fist against her mouth to hold in the sound. Owen watched her struggle. Watched her fight to maintain some shred of dignity, even as her world collapsed around her. And he felt something in his chest tighten. "You don't have to explain," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything." Vivian turned to look at him then. Really look at him. And Owen saw confusion flicker across her face. She was probably wondering why this stranger, this nobody in work boots and a flannel shirt, was sitting in her penthouse at 3 in the morning. He wondered the same thing himself. But he also knew that questioning the moment would break whatever fragile thread had brought him here. So he met her gaze and waited. "Who are you?" she asked, and the question held genuine curiosity beneath its exhaustion. Owen considered his answer. He could tell her about the warehouse, about the shipments and the loading docks, about the mind-numbing rhythm of physical labor that paid his bills. But that didn't feel like the right answer. Instead, he told her the truth. "I'm nobody special," he said. "I'm a dad. I lost my wife 4 years ago, and I've been figuring out how to live ever since. Some days I'm good at it. Most days I'm not." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "When my wife died, I used to pray for my phone to ring. For anyone to call, even a wrong number, just so I wouldn't feel so alone." He met her eyes. "So when you called tonight, I couldn't hang up. I couldn't leave you alone in that." Vivian stared at him for a long moment, and Owen saw something shift in her expression. The walls she had built, the armor of wealth and power and cold professionalism, cracked just slightly. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything at all. She just leaned her head back against the couch, closed her eyes, and let the tears fall without trying to hide them anymore. Owen stayed exactly where he was. He didn't move closer. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply existed in the same space as her pain, a witness to her breaking. And somehow, that was enough. The night passed in fragments. At some point, Owen found the kitchen and made tea. He had to open 6 cabinets before he found the mugs. They were the kind that had never been used, still had tags on the bottom. The refrigerator was nearly empty. A bottle of champagne, some wilted lettuce, 3 containers of takeout that looked days old. This woman didn't cook. This woman didn't live in this apartment. She merely existed in it between business trips and board meetings. The tea itself was loose leaf and fancy, nothing like the Lipton bags in his own kitchen. But he figured it out eventually. When he brought the cup to Vivian, she wrapped her hands around it like it was the first warm thing she had touched in years. They didn't talk much. She told him more about the man who had betrayed her, a fellow executive named Jonathan, someone who had pursued her for years, someone she had finally trusted enough to let past her defenses. He had said all the right things. He had been patient and charming and persistent. He had made her believe that she could have a normal relationship despite her impossible schedule and her reputation for being cold. Owen listened without judgment. He didn't offer advice or platitudes. He didn't tell her she was better off without him, or that time heals all wounds. He just let her empty herself of the poison, and when she was done, they sat together in silence while the city outside transformed from night to dawn. At one point, Vivian fell asleep, her head tilted against the couch cushion, her breathing finally steady. Owen watched her for a moment, this powerful woman reduced to exhaustion, and felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. Not attraction, not pity. Something more complicated, something like recognition. "I should go," Owen said finally, when gray light began to seep through the windows. His daughter would be waking up soon, and Mrs. Patterson from next door could only watch her for so long. Vivian stirred, her eyes fluttering open. And for a moment she looked lost, like she had forgotten where she was, forgotten the terrible thing that had happened. Then reality settled back onto her shoulders, and Owen watched her rebuild her walls in real time. "Thank you," she said stiffly, "for coming. You didn't have to." Owen nodded, uncertain what to do with his hands. Part of him wanted to say something meaningful, something that would make this strange night matter. But he had never been good with words, and the moment felt too fragile for cliches. So instead, he walked to the kitchen counter, found a pen and a piece of paper, and wrote down his number. Underneath it, he added 3 words: "You're not alone." He left the note beside the empty teacup and let himself out without looking back. 3 days later, Owen was in the warehouse, stacking boxes onto a pallet, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. His heart did something strange in his chest, a flutter of recognition, of anticipation. He wiped his hands on his jeans and answered. "Hello." Silence on the other end. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. "It's me." Owen stepped away from his co-workers, ducking behind a tower of shipping containers for privacy. "Vivienne," he said, and he heard her sharp intake of breath at the sound of her name. "How are you?" Another pause. "I don't know," she admitted. "I keep waiting to feel something other than angry, but the anger just sits there, like a rock in my chest. I fired him, you know. Jonathan, and her, my assistant. Had security escort them both out of the building. Everyone thinks I did it for business reasons, for restructuring. Nobody knows the real reason." She laughed. That same humorless sound from the night in her penthouse. "I'm the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I make decisions that affect thousands of people. And I can't even figure out how to stop being furious at a man who isn't worth my fury." Owen leaned against a shipping container, phone pressed to his ear. "Anger's easier than sadness," he said. "It feels like power when everything else feels powerless." He thought of the months after his wife's funeral, when rage had been his constant companion. Rage at the drunk driver who killed her. Rage at God for taking her. Rage at himself for surviving. But it burns out eventually, and when it does, the sadness is waiting underneath. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "How did you survive it?" she asked. "Losing your wife. Being alone. How did you keep going when everything felt impossible?" Owen considered the question. No one had ever asked him that before. Not directly. Not with genuine interest in his answer. Most people avoided talking about his wife at all, as if grief were contagious, as if mentioning her name might remind him of something he could never forget. "My daughter," he said finally. "Every morning she needs breakfast. Every night she needs a bedtime story. I couldn't fall apart because she needed me to hold it together. She gave me a reason to get out of bed, when getting out of bed felt like the hardest thing in the world." He paused. "And I made things. Wooden toys, mostly. Something to do with my hands when my mind wouldn't stop racing." He didn't mention that his apartment was full of those toys now. A wooden elephant for her 2nd birthday, a dollhouse for her 3rd, an entire menagerie of animals carved during sleepless nights. Some things were too personal to share with a stranger. "What's her name?" Vivian asked. "Your daughter." Owen smiled despite himself. "Rosie. She's 7, has her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. She's obsessed with dinosaurs right now, can name about 50 different species, and gets annoyed when movies get them wrong." He heard Vivienne make a soft sound, almost a laugh, but warmer. "She sounds wonderful." "She is," Owen agreed. "She's the best thing I've ever done." Another pause stretched between them, but this one felt different, less heavy, more like the comfortable silence between two people who understood each other without needing to explain. "Can I call you again?" Vivian asked. And Owen heard the vulnerability beneath the question. She wasn't asking for permission. She was asking if he would answer. If he would keep showing up for a woman he barely knew, whose world was so different from his that they might as well be different species. "Anytime," he said. And he meant it. The calls became a ritual. Late at night, when Vivian couldn't sleep, when the memories of betrayal crept back like shadows, and the silence of her penthouse felt suffocating. Early in the morning, when Owen was making Rosie's lunch, and Vivian just wanted to hear about someone else's ordinary life. They talked about everything and nothing, about work, about loneliness, about the strange comfort of connecting with someone who expected nothing in return. Owen learned that Vivian had built her empire from scratch, that her father had abandoned the family when she was 12, that her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and still died too young from exhaustion. She had clawed her way through college on scholarships and determination, then spent 15 years proving she was more than a pretty face in a boardroom full of men who wanted her to fail. The Ice Queen persona wasn't who she was. It was armor. Protection against a world that had taught her, again and again, that vulnerability was weakness. Vivian learned that Owen had been a carpenter before his wife died, that he had given up his workshop and his dream of starting his own furniture business to take a job with steady hours and health insurance, that he sometimes felt like he was disappearing into a life that didn't fit him anymore. She learned about his wife, Caroline, her laugh that could fill a room, her stubbornness that matched his own, the way she used to sing off-key in the shower every morning without fail. She learned that Owen still kept her pillow on the bed, even though it had long since lost her scent. She learned that grief didn't end. It just became something you carried. They never talked about meeting again. The night in her penthouse felt like something outside of time, a bubble that would burst if they tried to recreate it. But Owen found himself thinking about her more than he should, wondering if she was eating, if she was sleeping, if she had stopped crying when she thought no one was watching. And Vivian found herself saving stories to tell him, small moments from her day that she wanted to share with someone who would actually listen, who wouldn't judge or advise or try to fix her. It was 3 weeks before she finally asked the question Owen had been dreading. "Can I see you?" Her voice was hesitant, almost shy, so different from the commanding tone she probably used in boardrooms. "Not at my penthouse, somewhere normal. Somewhere you choose." Owen was standing in his kitchen, watching Rosie color at the table. His daughter looked up when she heard him go quiet, her crayon hovering over a half-finished rainbow. "Daddy, who's on the phone?" "A friend," Owen said, and the word felt strange in his mouth. Was Vivian his friend? Something more? Something less? He didn't know how to categorize what was happening between them. "There's a diner near my apartment," he told Vivian. "Nothing fancy. Good coffee, though." He gave her the address. And they agreed to meet the following evening, when Mrs. Patterson could watch Rosie for a few hours. The diner was exactly what Owen had promised. Nothing fancy. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a counter with stools that wobbled, coffee that came in thick white mugs and never stopped getting refilled. The walls were covered with faded photographs of the neighborhood from decades past, and the jukebox in the corner played songs from before Owen was born. He arrived early and chose a booth near the back, where they could talk without being overheard. He was nervous in a way he hadn't been nervous since high school, when he had asked his future wife to the prom. This was ridiculous, he told himself. Vivienne was a CEO. He was a warehouse worker. They had nothing in common except pain, and pain wasn't a foundation for anything lasting. But when she walked through the door, all of his doubts went quiet. She looked different than he expected. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup. She wore jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she scanned the room with the uncertain expression of someone who had never been anywhere without a reservation. When she spotted Owen, her face transformed. Not quite a smile, but something close, something hopeful. "Hi," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Hi," he replied. And for a moment, that was enough. They ordered coffee and pie, apple for him, cherry for her, and talked for 3 hours straight, about her childhood moving from apartment to apartment, about his parents, who still lived in the same house where he grew up, about the pressure of being a woman in charge, about the pressure of being a single father, about all the ways they had built walls around themselves, and all the ways those walls were starting to crack. "I've never talked to anyone like this," Vivienne admitted, swirling her coffee. "Not my therapist, not my friends, if I even have friends anymore. Everyone wants something from me. Money, power, access, favors." She looked at Owen with an expression he couldn't quite read. "But you don't want anything." Owen considered that. "That's not true," he said slowly. "I want you to be okay. I want you to stop thinking you have to earn the right to be treated like a human being." He paused. "I want to understand why someone like you called someone like me in the middle of the night." Vivienne set down her coffee cup. "Someone like you," she repeated. "You mean someone good? Someone kind? Someone who actually cares about people instead of using them?" She shook her head. "You're the most real person I've met in years. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Owen didn't know how to respond to that. In his world, being real wasn't special. It was baseline. But he was beginning to understand that Vivienne's world operated by different rules. Rules that left her rich and powerful and desperately lonely. "Come to dinner," he said impulsively, "at my apartment. Nothing fancy. I'll probably burn something, and Rosie will definitely talk your ear off about dinosaurs. But it's real. It's my actual life." He held his breath, wondering if he had gone too far. Vivienne's eyes went wide. For a moment, he saw fear there, the fear of stepping outside the world she knew, of entering a space where her money and her title meant nothing. But then something else took over, something braver. "Okay," she said. "When?" She came on a Saturday evening, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Owen's weekly groceries. Rosie answered the door before Owen could get there, and he heard his daughter's voice ring out with confident authority. "Are you Daddy's friend? He talks about you a lot. Do you like dinosaurs? I can show you my collection. Also, why do you look so fancy?" Owen appeared behind Rosie, equal parts mortified and amused. "Sorry about the interrogation," he said. "She doesn't have a filter." Vivienne laughed, actually laughed, bright and surprised, and crouched down to Rosie's level. "I'm Vivienne," she said. "And I love dinosaurs. The T-Rex is my favorite, but I've heard good arguments for velociraptors." Rosie's eyes went wide. "You know about velociraptors? Daddy, she knows about velociraptors." She grabbed Vivienne's hand and dragged her toward her bedroom, leaving Owen standing alone in the doorway with a very expensive bottle of wine. Dinner was controlled chaos. Owen had made spaghetti, the one dish he could reliably not ruin, and Rosie insisted on sitting next to Vivienne, peppering her with questions about everything from her job to her favorite color, to whether she had any pets. Vivienne answered every question with genuine interest, her Ice Queen facade melting completely in the warmth of this tiny apartment. Owen watched her slowly relax, watched her laugh at Rosie's terrible dinosaur jokes, watched her help set the table without being asked. This was a version of her that the business magazines would never capture. After dinner, they put Rosie to bed together. Owen read the bedtime story, a tale about a brave princess who didn't need rescuing, while Vivienne sat in the corner of the room, watching with an expression that Owen couldn't quite name. Longing, maybe, or grief for something she had never had. When Rosie's eyes finally closed, they crept out and collapsed onto the couch, suddenly aware that they were alone for the first time since that night in her penthouse. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly, "for sharing this with me. I forgot what normal felt like, what family felt like." Owen looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone he hadn't expected. Not a CEO, not an ice queen. Just a woman who had been hungry for warmth and finally found it. "You looked happy tonight," he said, "playing dinosaurs with Rosie, eating burnt garlic bread, getting spaghetti sauce on your sweater." He gestured at the red stain on her sleeve. "That's not a version of you I expected to see." Vivian looked down at the stain and smiled, a real smile, soft and unguarded. "That's because no one ever invites me to get messy," she said. "Everyone assumes I want perfect things, expensive restaurants, luxury experiences." She met his eyes. "No one ever just offers me spaghetti." "Noted," Owen said. "From now on, only spaghetti." They both laughed, and the tension between them shifted into something warmer, something that felt like the beginning of a story instead of the end of one. Weeks became months. Vivian became a regular presence in Owen's life and in Rosie's. She showed up for soccer games and school plays, learned how to make grilled cheese without burning it, let Rosie paint her nails in increasingly terrible color combinations. She brought over dinosaur books she found at fancy bookstores, and Rosie corrected the scientific inaccuracies in each one with the authority of a 7-year-old expert. The three of them became a unit, mismatched and improbable, but real. The gossip magazines eventually noticed photographs of the CEO of Cross Industries leaving a modest apartment building, holding hands with a warehouse worker and a 7-year-old girl. Headlines screamed about scandals and secret lovers and gold diggers. The internet had opinions, and none of them were kind. The board of directors demanded an explanation. "Your personal choices are affecting company perception," they told her in a meeting that Owen heard about later. "This relationship is inappropriate. He's an employee. He's beneath your station. The shareholders are concerned about your judgment." Vivian had listened to their concerns with her famous Ice Queen expression, the one that gave nothing away. Then she had stood, smoothed her blazer, and delivered a single sentence. "My personal life is not up for corporate review." But the pressure didn't stop there. It never does. Rosie came home from school one day in tears, her small body shaking with sobs that she couldn't control. "The other kids said Daddy is dating a rich lady because we're poor," she cried, her words tumbling out between gasps. "They said, you're just trying to get her money. They said she's only pretending to like me because she feels sorry for us. Is that true, Daddy? Are we poor? Does Vivian not really like me?" Owen held his daughter and felt his heart crack into 1,000 pieces. This was his fault. He had invited Vivian into their lives without thinking about the consequences, without considering how the world would twist something pure into something ugly. That night, after Rosie was finally asleep, after he had wiped away her tears and promised her that everything was okay, he sat alone in the dark and faced the truth he had been avoiding. His happiness was hurting the people he loved, and he couldn't let that continue. He called Vivian. His hands were shaking, and his voice felt like it belonged to someone else. "We need to stop," he said, and the words felt like swallowing broken glass. "This isn't working. It's hurting Rosie. It's hurting your career. It's hurting everything." He heard her sharp intake of breath, but he kept going before he could lose his nerve. "I care about you. Maybe more than I should. But I can't be the reason your life falls apart. And I can't be the reason my daughter gets bullied at school." The silence on the other end was devastating. When Vivian finally spoke, her voice was controlled, too controlled, the voice of someone holding themselves together by sheer will. "So that's it? You're just going to give up? After everything?" "I'm not giving up," Owen said, his voice cracking. "I'm letting go. There's a difference. He closed his eyes, remembering his wife, remembering all the times he had learned that loving someone sometimes meant walking away. You don't need me, Vivian. You never did. You just needed someone to remind you that you're human, and I did that, but you need to figure out the rest on your own. Another pause. What if I don't want to do it alone? Owen's voice broke completely. Then prove it. Not to me, to yourself. Figure out who you are without a relationship to define you, without work to hide behind, without me to call at 2 a.m. when the nights get too dark. He took a breath that hurt his chest. And if you still want me after that, if you still want this life, this messy, ordinary life, then you know where to find me. He hung up before she could respond. And then he sat in his dark apartment and cried for the first time since his wife's funeral. Great heaving sobs that felt like they would never end. Months passed, the hardest months of Owen's life since losing his wife. He threw himself into work, into fatherhood, into the relentless routine of surviving one day at a time. Rosie stopped asking about Vivian after a few weeks, though sometimes Owen caught her looking at the chair where Vivian used to sit during their spaghetti dinners. Sometimes she would set 3 places at the table before remembering there were only 2 of them now. He didn't call her. She didn't call him. The silence between them felt like a physical weight, a missing limb that ached with phantom pain. Owen wondered if he had made the right choice, if walking away had been wisdom or cowardice, if loving someone from a distance was still love at all. Vivienne, meanwhile, was doing exactly what Owen had challenged her to do. She started therapy, real therapy, not the surface-level sessions she had been going through the motions of for years. She confronted the parts of herself she had buried, the abandonment issues from her father leaving, the way she used work to avoid feeling anything, the walls she had built so high that no one could climb them. She learned to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. She learned to be alone without being lonely. She learned that her worth wasn't measured in quarterly earnings or newspaper headlines. She also learned that healing didn't mean forgetting, that moving forward didn't mean leaving behind the people who had helped her get there. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after their last conversation, Owen's phone rang. He almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in his contacts, but it looked familiar, achingly familiar. His thumb hovered over the reject button. Then he thought of that first call, the one at 2 a.m. that had changed everything, and he answered. "Hello?" He heard her breathing on the other end, not crying this time, just breathing, steady and calm. "Owen," she said, and her voice was different, stronger, clearer, like something inside her had finally settled into place. "I'm not calling because I need you." Owen felt his heart stumble. "Okay. I'm calling because I want you. There's a difference." He heard her smile through the phone, could picture exactly how her face would look. Not the Ice Queen, not the broken woman, but something new. Something whole. "I took your advice. I went to therapy. Real therapy. I quit trying to fill the emptiness with work. I learned how to be alone without being lonely. I learned how to be myself without pretending." She paused. "And I still want you. I still want spaghetti dinners and burnt garlic bread and your daughter talking my ear off about dinosaurs." Owen closed his eyes. He was standing in the warehouse, surrounded by boxes and co-workers and the mundane noise of ordinary life. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the voice on the other end of the phone and the hope that was blooming in his chest, like something he thought had died. "There's a coffee shop," Vivienne continued, "on 5th Street. Nothing fancy. I hear they have good pie." She took a breath. "Would you like to meet me there? Tomorrow. Not at 2 a.m., just a normal time. Like normal people who are choosing each other." Owen laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in months. What time? How about 3 p.m.? I'll be there. She was already waiting when he arrived. Same corner booth they had shared before, same white mug of coffee between her hands. But she looked different now. Not broken. Not desperate. Just alive. Fully. Completely alive in a way that Owen hadn't seen before. She smiled when she saw him, and Owen felt something inside him unlock. Something he had been guarding so carefully that he had forgotten it was there. He slid into the booth across from her. Hi. Hi. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was warm, steady, certain. I need to tell you something. Owen waited, not speaking, hardly breathing. That night you came to my penthouse, Vivienne said. I was ready to give up. Not just on love, on everything. I had spent my whole life building walls, building empires, building this version of myself that couldn't be hurt. And when it all fell apart anyway, I didn't know what was left. She squeezed his hand. You showed me what was left. A woman who could still be kind. A woman who could still be loved. A woman who wasn't defined by her accomplishments or her failures. Owen felt tears prick at his eyes. You figured that out yourself. I just showed up, Vivienne finished. You just showed up. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Owen had ever seen. So here I am, showing up, not because I need you to save me, but because I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. Owen looked at her, this woman who had started as a wrong number and become something impossible to name. Friend, confidant, something more. He thought about Rosie, about spaghetti dinners and burnt garlic bread, about the life he had built from the wreckage of loss, and he realized that choosing someone wasn't the same as needing them. It was better. It was braver. It was the kind of love that could actually last. Okay, he said. Let's try this. For real this time. No running away. No pushing each other out. Vivienne's smile widened until it lit up her entire face. For real. Outside the coffee shop window, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Owen and Vivienne sat together, hands intertwined, talking about everything and nothing, about the future, about Rosie, about all the ordinary days stretching ahead of them. They didn't know what would happen next. They didn't need to know. All they needed was this moment, this choice, this second chance at something neither of them had expected to find. When Owen got home that evening, Rosie was waiting at the door with a knowing look that made her seem far older than 7. You saw her, didn't you? His daughter asked. Vivienne? Owen crouched down to Rosie's level. I did. How did you know? Because you're smiling, Daddy. Like really smiling. Like you used to smile when Mommy was here. Rosie threw her arms around his neck. Is she coming back? For spaghetti? Owen hugged his daughter tight, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo, feeling the weight of her small body against his chest. Yes, sweetheart. She's coming back, if that's okay with you. Rosie pulled back and looked at him with those serious eyes that were so much like her mother's. Daddy, I've been practicing my dinosaur facts for 6 months. She better be ready. Owen laughed and scooped his daughter up, spinning her around until she shrieked with joy. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that no longer felt quite so empty, a phone sat silent on a nightstand, not ringing at 2 a.m., not filled with desperate pleas or broken sobs, just waiting for tomorrow, when 2 people who had learned to stand alone would choose to stand together. The next Saturday, Vivienne arrived at their door again. This time, she wasn't carrying expensive wine. She was carrying a stuffed velociraptor she had found at a museum gift shop and a bag of groceries, because she had decided to learn how to make spaghetti herself. Rosie answered the door, saw the dinosaur, and screamed with delight. Owen watched from the kitchen as his daughter dragged Vivian inside, already launching into an explanation of why velociraptors were actually much smaller than the movies showed them. And in that moment, standing in his tiny kitchen with flour on his hands and the sound of his daughter's laughter filling the apartment, Owen understood something he had been too afraid to believe. That wrong numbers could become right answers, that broken people could help each other heal, that love, when you were brave enough to choose it, could be the most ordinary and extraordinary thing in the world. "Can you come over and be with me?" she had asked that night, 6 months ago. And he had. He had come over and stayed. Not because she needed him to save her, but because they had both learned that the bravest thing you could do was choose to be with someone. Not at 2 a.m. when the world was falling apart, but at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, at dinner time on a Saturday, in all the ordinary moments that made up a life. That was the real answer to her question. Not a rescue, not a fairy tale, just two people standing in a small kitchen, making spaghetti together while a 7-year-old explained the Cretaceous period in exhaustive detail. And that was more than enough. That was everything.